The aliens' challenge. The galaxy was at peace, or so it seemed. Across countless planets, different species lived their lives, following their own paths. But the peace was fragile, and for one mighty alien empire, peace was simply too boring. Far beyond Earth's reach, on a planet orbiting a distant star, the ruling aliens, the Varric, had been watching humanity for years. Their empire was powerful, vast, and feared by all other races. No one dared to challenge them, not since their brutal conquests hundreds of years ago. Their greatest warriors were known across the stars as undefeated. No one, it seemed, could match them in combat. That was until Earth caught their eye. It all began with a single message. The Varric Emperor, a towering figure whose face was rarely seen by outsiders, had grown tired of his empire's dominance. He craved a new challenge, one that would prove the superiority of his race beyond any doubt. Earth, with its young and rapidly evolving species, seemed like the perfect test. Humanity, with its unpredictable nature, might just be the one to bring excitement back to the galaxy. In the heart of their worship, the Varric Emperor made a decision. We will test their strength. I will send our finest warrior to their world. He will show them what true power looks like. This was no ordinary warrior. Korath, a name feared by many, was known throughout the galaxy for his ruthless fighting style. His enemies had fallen before him, one by one, their battles recorded in the history books of every race he had defeated. The Varric believed that Korath was untouchable, unstoppable, the perfect instrument of their will. But this time, Korath wasn't just going to fight another race or another species. This time, he was being sent to a planet that had no experience with intergalactic war, a planet that had not yet realized the danger that was about to come. The challenge was clear. Korath would face a single human. Not an army, not a battalion, just one man. And in doing so, the Varric would prove to the universe that no one, no matter how fierce, could stand against their might. Korath's ship hurtled through the stars, faster than any human could comprehend. On board, the warrior meditated in his special chamber, surrounded by the hum of technology that had no equal in the galaxy. His armor was pristine, polished to perfection, ready for the battle that lay ahead. His mind was focused on the task at hand, crushing the human who dared to accept his challenge. On Earth, humanity was blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. It had been an ordinary day. People went to work, students went to school, and the world turned as it always did. But when the Varric made their entrance, it would shake the very foundations of Earth's existence. Korath's ship descended onto Earth's atmosphere with a loud roar, shaking the ground beneath him. He landed in a vast, empty field, far away from any major cities. The Varric Emperor had chosen a remote location to make his point. The challenge would take place away from the eyes of the masses, for it was not the human people who needed to see this, it was their leaders. As Korath stepped off his ship, he was met by a team of human officials. The sight of this mighty alien warrior made their hearts race. His armor was nearly as tall as the average building, and his presence alone commanded attention. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on the humans who had gathered before him. There was no warmth in his gaze, only the promise of violence. The leader of the human delegation, a high-ranking military official named General Harris, stepped forward. He extended his hand in what was meant to be a diplomatic gesture. "We accept your challenge," Harris said, his voice firm but nervous. Korath looked at the hand, then back at Harris, before letting out a low chuckle. "I do not shake hands. I do not offer pleasantries. I offer battle," he said, his voice booming with authority. "Where is the one who will face me?" Harris hesitated for a moment, then signaled to a figure standing in the distance. The crowd parted as a man walked forward, wearing no armor, no weapons, just a simple outfit, dark pants, a t-shirt, and combat boots. His name was Jackson Carter, but the world knew him simply as Jax. He was not a soldier by profession, but a former mechanic who had found himself in situations where his instincts and courage had won him battles. He wasn't part of any military force, and he didn't follow orders. He didn't play by the rules. Korath sized him up with disdain. The human was small, weak, in the alien warrior's eyes. But Korath didn't know the one thing that made Jax different from anyone else. He wasn't afraid, and he didn't care about what was supposed to happen. Jax stepped forward and locked eyes with Korath. "Let's get this over with," he said, his voice casual, almost too calm. The crowd gasped. This was it. The moment humanity's fate was decided. The strongest warrior the universe had ever known stood ready to fight a single human, and the human had no intention of backing down. The battle was about to begin. But little did Korath know, this was not going to be like any fight he had ever faced. The fight that defied all expectations. The air crackled with anticipation as Korath and Jax stood face to face. The Varric warrior towered over the human, his muscular frame a testament to years of brutal training and countless victories. Jax, on the other hand, appeared almost comically small next to him. His hands hung loosely by his sides, his posture relaxed, as if he were about to fix a broken machine instead of facing the most feared combatant in the galaxy. The Varric warrior's cold, calculating eyes studied Jax with an almost dismissive gaze. He had fought countless beings stronger, faster, and more dangerous than this human. He was certain that this challenge would be nothing more than a simple warm-up before his true conquest began. "Is this the best your species has to offer?" Korath sneered, his voice filled with derision. Jax didn't flinch. He just smiled, a small smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "You'll see soon enough," he said, his voice steady. The crowd of officials and soldiers surrounding them seemed to hold their breath as the two combatants sized each other up. Tension hung heavy in the air as everyone wondered just how long Jax would last. Korath made the first move, charging forward with terrifying speed. He was a blur as he swung his massive fists at Jax, each punch capable of pulverizing anything in its path. His attack was relentless, a series of blows that would have shattered any other human in an instant, but Jax didn't back down. In one fluid motion, Jax ducked under Korath's first punch and then sidestepped the second, narrowly avoiding the massive fist that swung toward him. He was fast, faster than anyone could have predicted. His movements were sharp, deliberate, and calculated, an uncanny mixture of skill and raw instinct. The crowd gasped in shock. They had expected the human to be overwhelmed within seconds, but instead, Jax seemed to dance around Korath, dodging and weaving with an ease that left the Varric warrior frustrated. Korath roared in anger and swung again, this time with both fists coming down toward Jax in a crushing blow. But Jax was ready. He dropped to the ground, rolling smoothly under the attack, and then sprang back to his feet with surprising agility. "You're fast," Korath growled, his eyes narrowing. "But speed won't save you." Jax didn't respond, his focus entirely on the fight. His mind raced, analyzing Korath's movements with precision. He was looking for an opening, waiting for the right moment to strike. The alien warrior's attacks were powerful, but they were also predictable. Each strike was followed by a brief moment of vulnerability, a slight pause as Korath prepared for his next move. Jax knew he had to time his attack perfectly, or else he would be crushed under Korath's immense strength. Suddenly, Korath lunged forward, his fist aimed directly at Jax's chest. It was the opening Jax had been waiting for. In an instant, Jax dropped to the ground, using Korath's own momentum against him. He slid underneath the Varric warrior's arm and kicked out with all his strength, sending a powerful blow to Korath's side. The attack landed with a sickening thud, and Korath staggered back, caught off guard by the force of the strike. He let out a sharp growl, his eyes flashing with fury. The crowd was silent. No one had expected Jax to land a hit, let alone one that had caused Korath to stumble. "You dare?" Korath snarled, his voice dripping with rage. He turned to face Jax, his expression twisted with anger. He had underestimated the human, and now he was paying the price. But Jax wasn't finished. He wasn't about to give Korath the chance to recover. With lightning speed, he lunged forward, his fists flying as he unleashed a flurry of strikes that caught the alien warrior off guard. Korath tried to block, but the human was everywhere at once. Jax's fists struck with precision, targeting weak points in Korath's armor. For the first time in his life, the mighty Varric warrior was on the defensive. Korath roared, his frustration mounting as the human continued to press the attack. His strength was unmatched, but Jax's agility and unpredictability were proving to be his greatest weapons. In that moment, the unthinkable happened. The invincible Korath, the galaxy's greatest warrior, was beginning to struggle. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The mighty Varric warrior, who had conquered planets and crushed entire armies, was now being forced to fight for his life by a single human. And the more Korath fought, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary man. Jax was something different, something the Varric had never encountered before. The tipping point. Korath's chest heaved as he fought to regain control. His strength was legendary, but Jax had managed to strip away the arrogance that once fueled him. The human was proving to be far more than a mere annoyance. With every punch, every dodge, every step, Jax was slowly, systematically breaking him down. The Varric warrior's usual confidence had begun to crack. His movements were less fluid now, more erratic. He swung wildly, but Jax was everywhere at once, sliding out of the way, striking when least expected, wearing him down. Jax's eyes never wavered, his focus laser-sharp. He knew he couldn't rely on strength alone. It was his mind, his strategy, that would win the battle. Every muscle in his body was burning, but he refused to let the fatigue take over. The fight had become personal now. Korath had underestimated humanity, and Jax had every intention of proving just how badly. With another furious swipe, Korath missed by mere inches, his massive fist crashing into the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the arena, causing the metal floor to tremble. Jax saw his opportunity. He lunged forward and delivered a lightning-fast uppercut straight to Korath's jaw. The blow landed with an audible crack, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. Korath staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. The warrior who had once struck fear into entire species had been stunned by a human. For the first time in his life, Korath found himself doubting his own strength. The crowd held its breath. Had Jax finally broken him? Korath wiped the blood from his mouth, his fury escalating. This was no longer just a fight. It was a battle for his honor. He couldn't lose to this human. He wouldn't lose to a human. But as he lunged once again, this time with a brutal series of strikes, Jax's mind was already calculating his next move. He had done it. He had broken the warrior's spirit. With a quick roll, Jax ducked under Korath's punch and spun around, striking a devastating blow to Korath's ribs. The alien warrior let out a sharp, pained gasp. His once indomitable frame buckled under the pressure of the human's relentless assault. The crowd erupted into a mix of astonished gasps and murmurs. How was this happening? How was this frail human holding his ground against the fiercest fighter in the galaxy? Korath's breath became ragged, his body finally showing signs of exhaustion. Jax was relentless, every move calculated and precise. He knew that this was his moment. If he hesitated now, if he allowed Korath to recover, the Varric warrior would destroy him without mercy. Korath's vision blurred with rage. His pride had been shattered, and that was something he couldn't accept. The alien's entire life had been devoted to conquest, to dominating every being in his path. Now he was being humiliated by a human who should have been no match for him. "You will regret this," Korath roared, his voice filled with a terrifying mixture of fury and desperation. With a final, desperate attempt, he charged at Jax with the intent to crush him. But Jax had already anticipated the move. In a swift motion, he sidestepped and delivered a punishing elbow strike to the back of Koreth's neck. The warrior's body went rigid as the blow knocked the wind out of him. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. For a moment, there was silence in the arena. The crowd, once brimming with anticipation, now stood in stunned disbelief. The mighty Koreth, the alien warrior who had destroyed worlds and annihilated armies, was brought to his knees by a single human. Koreth's gaze flickered with both rage and confusion as he looked up at Jax, still standing tall before him. His breathing was labored, each breath a painful reminder of his failure. For all his strength, for all his experience, he had never encountered an opponent like this. Jax stood above him, his chest rising and falling with each breath, but his eyes remained cold and focused. He knew this was only the beginning. He had forced Koreth to the ground, but the real battle wasn't over yet. There were still more alien forces watching, and they were all waiting to see who would emerge victorious. But Jax wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to prove a point. He was fighting to show the galaxy that humans were not to be underestimated, that they could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest of warriors and come out on top. Koreth, his pride shattered, looked up at Jax with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "This isn't over, human. I'll make sure of it." Jax didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of someone who knew victory was within reach. "It already is," he said. "You've already lost." The turning point. The arena fell silent as the echoes of Koreth's crash reverberated through the chamber. His massive body lay prone on the ground, every movement slow and deliberate as he struggled to rise. But his strength had waned. He was no longer the unbeatable warrior he had once been, and Jax could feel it. The tides were shifting, and now, for the first time in this battle, the alien warrior was aware of his own vulnerability. Jax stood over him, eyes narrowed. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to take advantage of the opportunity, to finish the job and prove once and for all that humans could not be ignored, that they could be feared just as much as any other species in the galaxy. But Jax held back. His training, his instinct, knew the fight wasn't over yet. "Get up," Jax growled. "I'm not done with you yet." Koreth's head jerked up at the sound of Jax's voice, his face contorted with anger. The alien's jaw clenched as he gripped the floor with his hands, using every ounce of his remaining strength to push himself upright. Blood dripped from his brow, his once pristine armor dented and cracked from the brutal blows he had suffered. The crowd, who had once cheered for Koreth's inevitable victory, now watched in stunned silence, their disbelief evident. Jax had done what no other being had been able to do. He had humbled the mighty Varric warrior. The tension in the arena was palpable. Everyone, aliens, humans, and even Koreth himself, knew that this was a defining moment. The warrior's pride was broken, and his desire for revenge burned hotter than ever. Yet beneath that rage, there was fear. Fear that Jax the human was not merely a fleeting challenge, but a threat to the Varric warrior's legacy and the alien supremacy that Koreth had worked so hard to build. Koreth stood shakily, his gaze never leaving Jax. He was stronger than any other alien Jax had faced before, but now he felt the weight of his years of conquest. The enemy before him was relentless, untamed, and unpredictable. In a galaxy where strength was everything, Jax's ingenuity and unwavering focus had shaken Koreth's foundation. Koreth gritted his teeth, muttering through clenched jaws, You've taken everything from me. But this ends now." Without warning, Koreth lunged forward with a roar, a vicious swipe aimed directly for Jax's neck. The human's instincts kicked in immediately as he sidestepped the attack, rolling across the ground and landing on his feet. He was quick, agile, and most importantly, unpredictable, something Koreth had failed to account for. Jax's response was immediate. He didn't wait for Koreth to recover. He didn't hesitate. He knew his next move before the alien had even completed his swing. The human's foot shot out, catching Koreth's legs from beneath him, and sending the massive warrior crashing back to the ground. The crowd collectively gasped as Korath crumpled again, this time unable to get back up immediately. For the first time, it seemed as though Korath was truly broken, not just physically, but mentally as well. He had never fought a human who refused to back down, who could keep pushing no matter how much pain they were in. Jax towered over him once again, breathing heavily but resolute. "I told you. I'm not done." Korath growled, but the fire in his eyes was dimming. There was no denying the truth. Jax had broken through the shell of invulnerability that Korath had built over years of domination. The alien's confidence was gone, replaced with a terrifying realization. For the first time, Korath had to face the possibility that it wasn't just this battle he was losing. It was his place in the galaxy, his very identity. How? How is this possible? Korath gasped, his voice shaky. "You're just a human. You're nothing." But Jax's eyes flashed with cold intensity. "We've always been more than just nothing," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "And you're about to find that out the hard way." Korath's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear, it was rage. His ego had been crushed, but he would not let Jax have the last word. The warrior's hand reached for a hidden weapon on his belt, a last-ditch effort to regain control. But Jax was faster. Before Korath could even pull the weapon from its sheath, Jax's fist collided with the alien's wrist. The weapon fell from Korath's grasp, landing harmlessly on the floor. A final insult. A final defeat. The power was now entirely in Jax's hands. The Varric warrior staggered backward, his body betraying him. His strength was gone, his will broken. But Jax wasn't finished. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to send a message. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the next move. The mighty Korath, the warrior who had struck fear into the hearts of many, was now completely at the mercy of a single human. Jax stood tall and unwavering. "This fight is over. I've won." But Korath, despite his fall, managed a wicked grin. His eyes flashed with one final glimmer of defiance. "No," Korath said through gritted teeth, "it's not over yet." The air crackled with tension. There was something more lurking beneath Korath's defiance, something deeper than just rage. The galaxy may have watched this battle, but the true war was just beginning. The hidden truth. The arena was eerily quiet, the silence almost suffocating. Jax stood victorious, but his heart pounded in his chest as he watched Korath, still on the ground, breathing heavily. The alien's defiant grin remained, but there was something unsettling about it. Jax could sense that Korath wasn't just conceding defeat, he was hiding something. As the crowd's murmurs grew louder, Jax's eyes narrowed. He had been in many battles before, faced many enemies, but this one felt different. He had expected Korath to go down fighting, not with a hidden trick up his sleeve. There was a reason the Varric warrior hadn't given up entirely, and Jax knew he needed to find out what it was. Korath's hand twitched, and Jax instinctively took a step back. It was too quiet, too still. The alien's broken form had a dangerous aura to it, one that didn't match his outward condition. The warrior spoke again, his voice low and filled with malice. "You've won the battle, human. But you've unwittingly triggered something much worse than you can imagine." Jax's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" he demanded. Korath's eyes gleamed with a mix of contempt and fear. "You think this is just about you and me. You think that defeating me means you've conquered the galaxy. You're wrong." Jax's breath caught. He had never been one to back down, but Korath's words hung in the air like a warning bell. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but now a new, more dangerous realization was creeping into his mind. There was more at play here, something bigger than he could have ever anticipated. "You see, human," Korath continued, his voice raspy but growing more intense, "this battle, this arena, isn't just a test of strength. It's a message, a warning. You've stirred the hive. Jax narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, stirred the hive? Korath chuckled, a low, dark sound. The Varric warriors aren't just soldiers. We're the vanguard, the first wave. You defeated me, yes, but we are just the beginning. Now, the rest of our empire will come for you. And for all your kind, your world, your species. His smile twisted into something that resembled both victory and despair. And you will never see it coming. Jax's mind raced as the weight of Korath's words sank in. The Varric Empire wasn't a lone force. They were part of something far greater, a galaxy-spanning power that had been hidden in the shadows. Now that Korath had been defeated, a dangerous ripple had been sent through their ranks. And Jax had unwittingly made himself, and Earth, public enemy number one. Before Jax could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the arena. The audience, still stunned by the turn of events, had begun to stir. But it was the appearance of several figures walking into the arena that froze them all in place. Korath's gaze shifted toward the new arrivals, his grin slowly fading. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were clad in dark armor, their faces obscured by helmets. They moved with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Jax's instincts kicked in. These weren't just reinforcements. They were elite. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. Korath, the council has spoken. You have failed. Your defeat has set a chain of events in motion, and now the price must be paid. Korath's eyes widened, and his chest heaved with a mix of anger and resignation. You don't understand, he spat, his voice hoarse. They will come. They. The soldier raised a hand to silence him. Enough, warrior. The council has decided. You are no longer of use. Korath's gaze shifted back to Jax, his eyes burning with a new dangerous fire. You've no idea what you've done. You've doomed your people. You've doomed us all. With a swift motion, the soldier's weapon powered up, a blinding blue energy emanating from the blade. It was clear that Korath's fate was sealed. The Varric warrior had been a tool, a pawn in something far greater than he realized, and now even he was expendable. Jax stood frozen, watching as the soldier approached Korath, the warrior's once proud figure now crumpling in defeat. Korath didn't even try to fight back. There was nothing left for him. His last words echoed in the stillness, a grim warning to Jax. Prepare yourself, human. The galaxy is about to change, and you won't survive it. The soldier's weapon struck, and Korath was no more. But Jax's heart pounded faster than ever. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The soldiers turned their attention to Jax, their gazes cold and calculating. Jax knew they weren't here to congratulate him. They weren't here to negotiate. No, they were here for something else, something that had yet to reveal itself. And Jax realized, in that moment, the true weight of what he had just set in motion. The fight for survival had just begun, and the odds were worse than he could have ever imagined. As the soldiers moved toward him, Jax's mind raced. He had no choice but to prepare for what was coming next. He had no idea what these forces were, but he would face them, just as he had faced Korath. It was the only way to protect his world, and he would do whatever it took to win. The galaxy's unseen enemy. The soldiers encircled Jax with a precision that made his blood run cold. Each one of them exuded a calm, deadly aura, their faces hidden behind masks, but their stance told him everything he needed to know. They weren't here to fight for sport. They were here for something far more sinister. Jax's hand instinctively hovered over the weapons strapped to his waist. His pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. He had faced impossible odds before, and somehow, he had always come out on top. But something in the air felt different now. It wasn't just the weight of Korath's final words. It was the overwhelming sense that the galaxy was much darker than he'd ever realized. The soldier who had struck down Korath stepped forward, his voice as cold as the metal of his armor. "You've made a grave mistake, human," he said, his tone void of emotion. But it's not too late for you to join us. Jax's eyes narrowed. He had no intention of aligning himself with anyone who threatened Earth. The thought of joining these shadowy figures, whoever they were, was laughable. "Who are you?" Jax demanded, his voice steady, but the tension in his body betraying the urgency he felt. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. These weren't just random warriors, they had purpose, and that purpose was connected to Koreth's cryptic warning. The soldier's hand hovered near his chest, and with a swift motion, he activated a holographic display. A map of the galaxy spread out before Jax's eyes, and it wasn't just any ordinary map. This was a map of territories, planets that had been marked, some familiar and others completely unknown. But the most chilling part of the display was a bright red dot that flashed ominously near Earth's position. "This," the soldier said, pointing to the red dot, "is where the Varric Empire's influence ends. But it's just the beginning. You've drawn the attention of something much worse. Something that even the Varric fear." Jax's heart skipped a beat. He had thought that the Varric warriors were the galaxy's biggest threat. He had thought that defeating Koreth was the end of the battle. But this was different. "You're telling me the Varric weren't the real threat?" Jax asked, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. The soldier's head tilted, as if the question itself was beneath him. "The Varric are pawns. The galaxy is controlled by an unseen hand, and they've had their eyes on Earth for centuries." Jax's breath caught in his throat. Earth wasn't just caught in the middle of a galactic war. It was the center of a much larger struggle. Whoever this unseen hand was, they had been pulling the strings from the shadows. And now, they had turned their gaze toward him. "There's only one way to stop them," the soldier continued, his voice cold and calculating. "Join us, fight with us, and we will help you defend your world. Refuse, and you'll watch your species fall, one by one." Jax clenched his fists. He had never been one to take orders, let alone from someone like this. But the soldier's words weighed heavily on his mind. What were they offering? And what would happen if he refused? "I don't care who you are," Jax said, his voice low but firm. "I'll never join you." The soldier's mask remained expressionless, but the faintest flicker of amusement passed through his eyes. "That's what we were hoping you'd say." Before Jax could react, the soldiers stepped forward in perfect synchronization, their weapons now aimed at him. But something about their stance felt different. They weren't here to kill him. They were here to test him, to gauge his potential. Whatever they were planning, they needed him to make a choice. And that choice was coming faster than he could have anticipated. Without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The arena's structure, already damaged from the earlier chaos, began to shake violently. The soldiers' expressions flickered for a brief moment. Concern? Fear? Jax couldn't be sure, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't part of their plan. "We've overstayed our welcome," the soldier said abruptly, his tone now laced with urgency. "This isn't the time for games. The others are coming." Before Jax could ask who the others were, the soldiers began to retreat, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. The arena fell silent once more, but now, the tension in the air was unbearable. What had just happened? And what was about to happen? Jax turned and ran toward the nearest exit, the feeling of dread weighing heavily on his shoulders. He had to get back to Earth. He had to warn them. He didn't know who the others were, but he had a sinking feeling that humanity was about to face a threat beyond anything they had ever imagined. As he made his way out of the arena, his thoughts raced. He had just been thrust into the heart of something much bigger than a battle between species. The galaxy's greatest secrets were beginning to unravel, and humanity was standing at the center of it all. The question was, would they be ready for what was coming next? The arrival of the unseen forces. Jax barely had time to catch his breath before the ground trembled once more. This time, it wasn't a distant rumble. It was a violent shaking, as though something massive was approaching. The walls of the arena cracked and groaned under the pressure, and Jax's instincts screamed at him to move. He sprinted out of the crumbling structure, his mind racing. The soldiers had vanished into the shadows, leaving him with more questions than answers. But what really unsettled him was the strange urgency in their retreat. It was as if they knew something he didn't. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. As Jax reached the outer walls of the arena, the sky above him split open with a deafening roar. A massive ship descended, its dark silhouette eclipsing the sun. The sheer size of it was incomprehensible, larger than anything he had ever seen, even in his wildest imaginings. It seemed to swallow the sky, its hull sleek and menacing, adorned with strange symbols Jax couldn't understand. The ship hovered for a moment, casting a shadow that blanketed the entire arena, before slowly lowering itself to the ground. It landed with a heavy thud, sending a shockwave that rattled the earth beneath Jax's feet. The air grew thick with tension as the ship's doors began to open, and from within emerged figures that sent chills down Jax's spine. They were not like the Varric warriors he had fought before. These beings stood tall, their armor adorned with intricate alien designs that seemed to shimmer in the light. Their faces were concealed by masks, but Jax could feel their eyes on him. He could feel their judgment, their power, and their intentions. The soldiers he had faced earlier had been dangerous. But these were something entirely different. They radiated a sense of authority and control, as if they were the true rulers of the galaxy, and they were here for a reason. Jax didn't move. He couldn't. His body felt frozen, caught in the gravity of the situation. His mind flashed back to the soldiers' words, the ones who had warned him of the others. These were them, the ones who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, the ones who had manipulated the galaxy for centuries. One of the alien figures stepped forward, his voice low and commanding as it echoed through the empty arena. "Human," he said, his voice carrying an unnatural, guttural resonance. "We are the Jar, and we have been watching you. Your species has shown potential, but you are not ready for what lies ahead." Jax clenched his fists, refusing to show any sign of fear. He had fought against the odds before, and he wasn't about to back down now. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the storm of questions swirling in his mind. The Jar's gaze remained fixed on him, piercing through him as though he were nothing more than an insect under their scrutiny. "We have come for you, human. You will be our instrument. The galaxy will soon fall to chaos, and only the strongest will survive. Your world, your species, will either bow to us or be destroyed. The choice is yours." Jax's stomach twisted. They weren't just here to conquer. They were here to break humanity, to use them as tools in their game of galactic domination. He could already feel the weight of their words sinking in, and he knew they weren't empty threats. Before he could respond, the ground beneath him began to shake once again. The Jar didn't flinch. They had anticipated this moment, this meeting, and it seemed as though everything had been calculated. This was just the beginning of something much larger, something far more dangerous. And then, as if the universe had responded to the Jar's proclamation, another figure appeared on the horizon. A human, clad in worn, battle-scarred armor. His face was obscured by a helmet, but Jax instantly recognized him. It was the man who had led the charge on Earth, the one who had once stood in the face of impossible odds and never flinched. The Jar turned their gaze toward him, and the tension in the air doubled. This man wasn't just any soldier, he was the wild card. He was humanity's last hope, and whatever he had come here for, Jax knew it was connected to the looming battle that would soon unfold. The Jar's leader raised a hand, signaling for the human to approach. Jax's heart pounded in his chest as the figure walked forward, his steps slow and deliberate. He knew what was coming. He knew the choices that lay ahead, and the weight of the universe rested on his shoulders.